Last month, Southampton's 11-year stay in the Premier League came to an end. But how did this happen? After record investment for the club in both the summer and January transfer windows, the club would cycle through three managers and be relegated with a whimper in bottom place, despite the fact that the players signed on paper provided an uptick in quality to the squad. So I'm here to look at why Saints went down, what were the main reasons, and to do a complete review of our season. So last June, the big dilemma for the board and the thing dividing the fans was whether Ralph Hasenhüttl should stay on as first team manager. Now, some said that he should because he deserved a chance at investment. He deserves to be backed because he'd been working on a shoestring during the 3.5 years he'd been at the club. And I myself was in that camp. Whereas on the other side of the debate, people were saying poor substitutions, a distant relationship with many key players, losing the support of the squad, and he's lost his passion for football. And in hindsight, despite the fact that we definitely regretted after sacking him in November, the people who suggested he go in the summer were probably right. Because he had clearly lost his passion for football, and his passion was what endeared him to the fans, was probably a large part of what endeared him to the board in the first place, and why it enjoyed such success in Germany. And the fact that he wasn't connecting with the fans, wasn't connecting with the players, should have been a big red flag. But Rasmus Ankersen personally made the decision to stick with Hasenhüttl and instead to dismiss Kelvin Davis, Craig Fleming, and Dave Watson, who have been long-serving coaches. And in The Athletic, it was said that Dave Watson had, when he was part of the England setup, he had been the one who had instructed Harry Kane to take corners. Now, whilst I'm not going to judge whether these coaches were good or bad coaches, it was clear that the coaching environment at Saints had become very stale, and a fresh voice was needed. That fresh voice would be Ruben Sellers, a highly talented coach who came in from FC Copenhagen and had an excellent defensive record and was supposed to help with fixing the defence, fixing set pieces, and providing a bridge between Ralph and the players. Other coaches that would join would be Carl Martin, who would be promoted into the senior coaching staff after an excellent season co-managing the under-18s with Mikey Harris, and Alex Clapham, who had joined from Notts County, but would swiftly be sacked after being deemed to not be up to the required coaching standard in the Premier League. He then went off to Brazil to become a coach for Vasco da Gama. It had been no secret that Saints wanted to pursue a youth-first transfer policy, and this was to be continued under new owner Sport Republic, who provided hefty backing in the summer window. First player through the door was Manchester City goalkeeper Gavin Bazunu for around £12 million. It was a risk, and it's clearly not paid off. A young goalkeeper is probably the position where you don't want a young player unless they're incredibly mentally strong. Because if you're in goal and you make a mistake, 9 times out of 10, that's going to lead to you conceding a goal. And you've got to be constantly alert, and your confidence can dip very quickly. And of course, with the pressure and scrutiny that Bazunu was under at Premier League level, whoever thought this was a good idea, it's very questionable. Whether or not we should have stuck with Fraser Forster is a whole different dilemma entirely. But whilst Bazunu has promise, and he's shown that at times this season, a more senior goalkeeper had to be signed. However, on the flip side, Armel Bella-Kotchap came in shortly after for around £9 million from VfL Bochum and has been far and away the club's best defender this year, particularly in the first half of the season. He's established himself consistently as a regular starter under Hasenhüttl and Ruben Sellers, and although he was dropped from the squad under Jones, he bounced back when the Welshman was sacked in February. He was reportedly taking injections to play in our relegation fight, which is why I think he's not one of the people The Athletic are saying that are using injuries as an excuse to not play for the club, and I don't really know where that's come from. I think he's just fairly injury prone, and he's got a good attitude and will make a healthy profit on it. So Bella Kotchap was an example of the youth uh, policy working. He's been capped for Germany. He went to the World Cup with them, and definitely showing that he's up to the required standard in the Premier League. Moving into July, it became clear that Ralph was changing up his system, as we attempted to move towards a 5-3-2. For this, we signed Romeo Lavia from Manchester City. Now, I don't need to tell anyone how good Romeo Lavia has been. For £10 million, absolute bargain. We're going to make 5 or 6 times on that when we sell him this summer. And he was supposed to fit this system to a T. But working alongside Oriol Romeu and James Ward-Prowse was supposed to be what he was doing. But Oriol Romeu would be let go, and this 5 at the back system, which we would spend the whole summer learning, would be ditched in Game 2 against Leeds. A very interesting signing that we made was Joe Aribo from Rangers. Now, at the time, I remember thinking, because he cost only £6 million, that we pulled off a great deal. It was an absolute bargain because he scored in the Europa League final, international level player playing for Rangers, that massive club in Scotland. That he's not really delivered after a bright start. Neither Jones nor Sellers has seen anything in him or given him as close to the opportunities that Ralph afforded him, because he was one of the first names on the team sheet under Ralph. But aside from a couple of goals, and he looked really good when he first came in, strong, and he was able to win the ball back, be aggressive, but he's just completely faded. I hope he stays next season, because I think in the Championship he'd be very well suited to that. Aribo has been a disappointment. We also signed French striker Sekou Mara, and while signing a striker was good and something we needed to do, it was clear that he was signed for the future and to be a backup now, and a first-team striker was something we were still looking at. At the end of July, we secured a 3-1 victory over AS Monaco in a friendly, and I remember thinking that we played really well in that game. Adam Armstrong scored, and I held out a lot of hope that he was going to really kick on after a very disappointing first season. Moving into August, we started off with a 4-1 loss to Tottenham. Then, next week, 2-0 down against Leeds in the 70th minute. We make changes, introducing Mara and Aribo, move back to our preferred 4-2-2-2 and fight our way back into the game, get it back to 2-2 and win a point. Now, not only did Aribo score and Mara got a fantastic assist, it showed that we just couldn't play 5 at the back for whatever reason. And the switch away from 5 at the back was what would lead to Jan Bednarek's departure from the club on loan, as his attitude was deemed to be very poor by Hassan Hussel, and he would become surplus to requirements once Duye Kaletakar arrived on deadline day. Just before deadline day, we would secure a 2-1 victory over Chelsea, which, coupled with a 2-1 victory over Leicester 2 weeks prior, would propel us into 7th in the table. This, along with the news that we were going in for Cody Gakpo, was a sign that the future was looking bright. But as day dawned on the 1st of September, transfer deadline day, David Ornstein reported that Cody Gakpo would be staying at PSV. This was deeply, deeply disappointing, and still remains a key factor in our relegation, the fact that we didn't have someone who would score goals. Now, whilst Gakpo may not have been a Premier League proven striker, he would have been excellent. It would have been a real statement of intent, one of the signings of the season. But unfortunately, we weren't able to get him, and we also missed out on signing Goncalo Ramos from Benfica a couple of weeks prior to that. We did make some good signings on deadline day: Duye Kaletakar, Sam Edozie and Juan Larios, who have all been good this season, despite having limited opportunities. And Ainsley Maitland-Niles, who at first had a pretty bad attitude, has kind of reinvented himself under Sellers, but he's not coming back next season, and he's not the most popular with the fans, and he should not be being played ahead of Perrault at fullback. Moving into September, though, the mood was still one of optimism. Despite a narrow defeat to Wolves, Samadozi had come on and looked really bright. Then a defeat to Aston Villa was poor and damaging, and then came a really, really unacceptable performance when we lost 2-1 at home to Everton. This put us right back in trouble down the bottom of the table and showed that we really hadn't escaped what had been plaguing us for the previous seasons under Ralph. After the loss at home to Everton, Ralph was limping on, and the Athletic were reporting that he was on borrowed time. We would then lose to Manchester City, which it's Man City. Then we would draw to West Ham. Then we would win away at Bournemouth and hold Arsenal to a draw, showing that we were having a mini revival. However, around this time, Joe Shields, who had come in as head of recruitment from Manchester City, and although not directly involved, had been influential in the deals to sign the likes of Bazunu, Lavia, Edozie and Larios. He departed to take up a new role at Chelsea, and this was very damaging. Ralph personally came out in press conferences and was critical of Shields, albeit in a subtle way. And although Saints have now secured Darren Mowbray from Aberdeen to replace Shields, this hadn't come until a few weeks ago, and it would be Rasmus Ankersen who would lead our January recruitment. After October, we had a home match against Newcastle. This had followed on from a defeat against Crystal Palace. And in the match against Newcastle, despite a decent start, we would go on to suffer a 4-1 defeat, and it would be the end for Hasenhüttl. He would almost reach 4 years in charge, and no one could deny that he had done a great job. But it became clear that the time was right to part company with the Austrian. Almost immediately after Hasenhüttl was sacked, Fabrizio Romano broke the news that the Saints were going to chase Nathan Jones. We waited a couple of days until Luton confirmed that they had granted permission for Jones to speak to us, and just a couple of days after that, Jones would be in the hot seat. He was present as Ruben Sellers took charge of a victory on penalties over Sheffield Wednesday in the third round of the Carabao Cup. Jones's first match in charge was a 3-1 away defeat at Liverpool, which we didn't play too badly in, and then he had a full World Cup break, effectively a second pre-season to institute what he needed to institute. And I've already made a video, in fact, 2 videos on Nathan Jones, so you can go check those out to see what I think about Nathan Jones. But 6 weeks and nothing really changed. We really went backwards. Came back on Boxing Day in the Premier League with a 3-1 defeat to Brighton. We scraped through against Lincoln in the Carabao Cup. And that defeat to Brighton was just showed how they have gone on such an upwards trajectory and taken the place of the well-run, well-scouted, sell young players for profit club that we had used to be in like 2013 to 2016. Brighton and to a lesser extent Brentford have taken that role from us. And then Fulham would beat us by 2-1 despite an improved performance and a more solid defensive display on New Year's Eve. And again, Fulham had been a newly promoted side, but Marco Silva had them in the top half. And again, Fulham was someone who we were expected to go down, or at least if we were going to be in a relegation battle, they would also be in it. But they weren't. And this meant that we were really struggling to find 3 worst teams. Then came very, very damaging defeat to Nottingham Forest, 1-0 at home, thanks to a mistake by Lanko. Probably one of the worst games of football I've ever seen. And Jones came out in the press conference and was quite defensive because they stuck to their principles, which was ridiculous. And we just played hoofball for 90 minutes. Pathetic. And the team were completely booed off at the end of the game. Apparently, Rasmus Ankersen spoke to Jones after this, made it known that he wanted to see improvements very quickly. And then Saints made their first January signing, quite a decent one, Mislav Orsic, Croatian winger. However, this signing, for whatever reason, hasn't worked out. But I'm going to defend Rasmus Ankersen here and say that the January recruitment wasn't bad. Orsic, on paper, would have been a good signing. For whatever reason, he hasn't worked, which is a real shame. After Orsic, we would secure a 2-1 victory over Crystal Palace in the FA Cup, although that was mostly a team of case of us just being best, worst team. Then we would have one of our best performances in years in the Carabao Cup quarter-final. We would win 2-0 against Manchester City with goals from Sekou Mara and Moussa Djenepo, and that wasn't really with the first-choice side. But it was an absolutely brilliant performance. Everything just seemed to fall into place for us. And that brought Jones a lot of goodwill. And before that game, we had the announcement of Charlie Alcaraz, he was the best January signing by far, definitely in the top 3 signings we've made this year, and just all around incredible player. Hopefully we keep him next season. It's looking likely that we will, which would be great. He'll be a real asset in the Championship. And then after the Man City game, Alcaraz would make his debut away at Everton, where we would win at Goodison Park for the first time, I believe for the first time since the beginning of the Premier League. And then after that, Jones was back in goodwill with the fans and goodwill with the board. We would then lose to Aston Villa under controversial circumstances, where we'd have a goal disallowed for a foul, which was pretty questionable. We then narrowly lose to Newcastle in the Carabao semi-first leg. We then scrape past Blackpool in the FA Cup 4th round, and then get knocked out of the Carabao Cup on deadline day. We would sign James Bree on the cheap from Luton, which was a good signing, and although Jones probably had a hand in it, I imagine Sport Republic were tracking Bree before that. He's been decent in his limited appearances for the club, and there's literally no way the signing could turn out bad, because he came in for like $500,000, I think it was, which is just an incredible price in today's market. And then on deadline day, we spend almost $40 million to lure Kamaldeen Sulemana and Paul Onuachu to the south coast. Now, Sulemana has been hot and cold, but shown a lot of promise and scored 2 goals against Liverpool on the final day. Whereas Onuachu has been underused or misused and not had enough appearances, and we can mainly blame Ruben Sellers for that. Then came a 3-0 defeat against Brentford, after which Jones would say some just ridiculous things in his post-match press conference, which I've talked about in the Nathan Jones videos. We then played Wolves, and we were really good for about the first 65-70 minutes of that game. We would then concede 2 goals, which probably sums up why we're going down. Because that Wolves game wasn't necessarily our worst performance of the season, probably somewhere in the middle, but we were unable to hold on to a lead against the side also in the relegation battle. And it was simply because Julen Lopetegui made better substitutions and better tactical changes than Nathan Jones. Also, Wolves have been reduced to 10 men when Mario Lemina was sent off about half an hour into the game. So for us not to win that was just completely unacceptable, and Jones was out the following day. So the Jones experiment was very damaging, even though I don't think all of the blame can be attributed to him. And then came Jesse Marsch. We were in advanced talks with him. He had come down to stay at a hotel in Southampton, and then at the last minute he changed his mind. Now, why he changed his mind? Perhaps contract length was a thing. That's something I've seen floated around. Also, he apparently was not impressed by how the club is being run, although he does still retain respect for our project. So Marsch wasn't there, and Sellers would take the game against Chelsea, where we would win 1-0, keep a clean sheet, play excellently defensively, have a lot of passion, and after the game, Sellers would have the fans in the away end chanting his name. This led to Sellers winning the job on a permanent basis on the contract until the end of the season. Now, whilst people said this was a bit premature, other people said that we couldn't really attract anyone better, and if Sellers had the players on side, it was worth a shot. We would then do the most Saints thing ever and follow up a win at Chelsea with a defeat at Leeds in a pretty pathetic and limp display. Then Grimsby probably rivals Nottingham Forest for the worst performance of the season, one of the worst performances of our time since I've been supporting Saints. Um, just quite frankly pathetic. And although Grimsby were decent, they weren't like anything special. We were just horrendously bad. Although, take nothing away from Grimsby, especially their fans, bringing 5,000 fans down on a Wednesday night, cold Wednesday night at the start of March as well, is just incredible. They were absolutely incredible. And yeah, their cup run going on was great for football, even if it wasn't great for Saints. And the FA Cup wasn't our top priority. However, the performance was appalling. However, 3 days later, we would win 1-0 against Leicester. Another clean sheet, despite the fact that it was quite possibly the most undeserved clean sheet for a goalkeeper I've ever seen, because Gavin Bazunu didn't make a save, gave the ball away multiple times, and Kelechi Iheanacho somehow didn't score. I don't know how. But what was important is that we got the win, and Charlie Alcaraz got his second goal for the club. Then the next week, we would go and draw 0-0 against Manchester United in a very energetic and pulsating affair at Old Trafford, where both sides would come very close to winning, and Bazunu would play very well and atone for his performance against Leicester. And this showed that perhaps Sellers had finally fixed our very leaky defence, the thing that Jones was supposed to do. Perhaps this 39-year-old coach was going to do. Then, against Brentford, Sellers made very questionable selection decisions, including dropping Romeo Lavia for Ibrahima Diallo to make sure Lavia was rested for the match against Spurs, which was not really the decision I would have made. Brentford played their game very well, but it was a winnable game. We lost 2-0, but only conceded the second goal in the 98th minute, and we didn't really give the game a proper go. And once Paul Onuachu was brought on, we didn't give him any proper crosses to his head. Then 3-1 down against Spurs with about 15 minutes to go. Things were looking bleak for Sellers and for us. We would then have a comeback, which we've actually done quite a bit this season, even though before this season we barely did it at all and we would throw leads away all the time. But we came back from 3-1 down to draw 3-3 thanks to a goal from Theo Walcott, who has been decent in our relegation run-in, to be fair to him, and a penalty from James Ward-Prowse in injury time. And although 1 point from the Spurs and Brentford games was much below what we were aiming for, to come back from 3-1 down and you'd accept a point from that position. Then the international break came and Romeo Lavia was called up to the Belgium squad for the first time, although James Ward-Prowse would miss out on England. After the international break came West Ham versus Saints, and I watched that game and it very much summed up how we were performing under Sellers. We'd have a great performance and then just an acceptable one. We lost 1-0. We conceded a goal from a set piece. We gave one cross to Paul Onuachu when he came on, headed it against the crossbar, didn't give him another cross. And we seemed out of ideas, couldn't score. And I think the article published in The Athletic after the game summed it up best. Southampton's front four can press well, but where are the goals coming from? And then the next week, we would lose 4-1 against Manchester City, which it's Manchester City, you could kind of understand that. Then we'd go on to lose 2-0 against Crystal Palace, and after that game is when I turned against Sellers being given the job in the Championship, because clearly he had not been able to manage a sustained period of improvement. Around this time, it also became clear that several members of the senior staff were leaving. Joe Shields had gone, despite the fact he was a Sport Republic appointment, he'd gone of his own accord, but there were strong rumours that several staff were forced out or encouraged to leave to facilitate Sport Republic's changes to the club. So Matt Crocker, the director of football, who had done a really good job at rebuilding our academy twice, when he was first here from 2006 to 2013, and then when he came back in 2020, he went and he's taken up a job with the United States football team. and Matt Hale has gone, and he's just, like, as the day I'm recording this video, has joined Derby as their academy manager. Dan Rice went to Everton. He was, I believe, head of youth recruitment, and Alex Klein, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, highly respected performance analyst, joined Manchester United. So several senior staff departing. And also, it seemed like by now it was a matter of time for Martin Semmens, who, despite saying that his job and role wouldn't change, it had become clear that his job and role had changed under Sport Republic and the influence of Angus. And then we would have a very interesting game against Arsenal where we would be 2-0 up inside 14 minutes. We'd 3-1 up with 89 minutes on the clock, and would throw it away to draw 3-3. Which, although you take a point against the league leaders any day of the week if you're Saints, throwing away a 3-1 lead with that little time left to go, you just can't do it. And we did, which was just a great shame. And then following from Arsenal, we would play against Bournemouth and would lose 1-0. And by that point, that was where relegation was all but confirmed. We would lose to Newcastle. Then, in our perhaps last-ditch chance, we would lose to Nottingham Forest 4-3 in a winnable game. After having a great start, we would then proceed to concede twice to Tyrell Onyewinwe. That's probably mispronounced that name. Who hadn't scored since the 4th of January, and you guessed it. Then we'd lose 2-0 against Fulham to confirm relegation. In a pretty limp and pathetic performance that sums up how we performed in the second half of Ruben Sellers' tenure. We would then lose 3-1 to Brighton, although to Sellers' credit, he did give academy lads at Tino Livramento a chance. And then we'd have a very, very pulsating 4-4 draw against Liverpool on the final day of the season. So now we look to the future in the Championship. Russell Martin is poised to come in as new manager. I made a video on him, I think it was 3 weeks ago now, and he's still not been confirmed, but that's because we're waiting to pay less money on the compensation. And that's a good thing, because shrewd business, and we don't need to appoint him straight away. Sellers will be obviously off to take another management job somewhere else, and Martin Semmens has also departed. It appears we're playing hardball over James Ward-Prowse and Nathan Teller, demanding 50 million for James Ward-Prowse and pricing Burnley out of a move for Teller, who was their star man in the Championship last season. Perhaps we'll keep them, but even if we don't, we'll get a lot of money if anyone's willing to pay our price. And we'll also get a lot of money for Romeo Lavia, Carl Walker-Peters, decent money from Mohamed Salisu, and we'll see a few others moved on. But we'll then try and build in our new team. We're going to switch to a possession-based style of football, which will move away from the high-pressing style that we had under Ralph and that we were instituted under Sellers. I'll probably make like a season preview to cover this more, but this has been my season review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.